Hello and welcome to Series 6, Episode 7 of In Suspense, a podcast and vodcast for fans and writers of crime fiction. I'm Leslie Cara and my co-host is Lauren North.
Hello.
And as you can see, I'm not in my normal office today. I'm in a hotel in Manchester because I did an event last night. So that's why you can see a bed in the background. So apologies for that.
You're so dedicated, Leslie.
I did try and make the bed to make it look a little bit more presentable.
Very tidy.
But anyway, so on our last episode, we spoke to Graham Bartlett, police advisor and author, and that was a fascinating chat. The topic was policing for authors. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, do tune in. I mean, Graham's been all over the place this last week because, like me, it's been his publication.
So have you.
I know. Yeah, well, that's true. But well, you have to, don't you, in publication week? Well, I don't know what happened there. Something dropped off my table. Anyway, right. But today we've got a very exciting guest. We've got global best-selling author Lisa Jewell coming on, a jewel of a guest indeed. And I think it's safe to say we're both pretty excited about it, aren't we, Lauren? I mean,
yes, I have the biggest smile on my face. I am so excited. Yes.
And the topic is, and I must get this right because it's not sequins and villains, it's sequels.
Sequels. That's a good point. Yes. Yes, it's one of those things, isn't it? Because we get publicists asking us if we'd like to interview authors, and we do, and we talk about our topics we'd like to talk about and who we want to come on the show to talk about that topic. And then every now and again, there's an author that I just would love to talk to and just selfishly ask if they can come on the show. So I asked the publicist. So yeah, I'm really excited. It's a real dream, really, to speak to Lisa today for me.
So. Very excited as well. And she's such a lovely, lovely person. So,
good.
Yeah.
Have you met her before?
I have. I met her briefly at the Capital Crime launch party.
Oh, nice.
Yes. So that was nice. Yes. And of course, I was sent a proof of this, which we're going to be talking about later. I think you've got one as well.
Mine, yeah. And I've got the family remains behind me.
Oh yes, I've got mine at home, but I obviously didn't bring it with me because that would have been an extra weight in my lovely orange bag.
Of course, yes, very matching. Yeah. So tell us about your week and how it's been. So you've had quite a mad week of publication, haven't you?
Oh, it's been a lovely week. You know, I've really enjoyed it. On Thursday, I didn't have a launch party because I decided I wouldn't do that this time around. Had two, lovely launch parties for the first two, but I thought, no, not this time. But I did an event at Waterstones in Colchester. You were there, so you know about that, with Charlotte Northedge, and Alison Barrow was interviewing, and that was lovely, really, really nice. Got a cake made. Then I did an event in Halesworth, which is a lovely independent bookshop, Halesworth Books, run by Abby. Can't remember her surname at the moment, but anyway, Abby. And that was lovely. And that was a really well-attended event for a tiny bookshop. I think there was about 33 people in there, and it was standing remotely.
Oh, nice.
I know, it was fantastic. And so that was that. And then what else have I done? I'm sure I've done lots of other things. Oh, I went to did a book signing at Woodbridge Books, which is Woodbridge Emporium, is a great little independent bookshop. And it's just been taken over by a new owner called Susie Keepin. And I think she's going to change the name. It's going to be Woodbridge Books. But at the moment, it's still Woodbridge Emporium. And various sort of interviews on radio, the usual radio interviews, and now Manchester.
Yes, busy.
That was fun doing the Crime Central event with the irrepressible Rob Parker.
He gets everywhere as well, actually, doesn't he?
He does, and it was Russ Thomas, who's lovely, isn't he?
Oh, he's lovely. Yeah, I think we're hoping to have him on the show, aren't we?
Yeah, we must get. In fact, he did.
We're getting him on next season. Yeah. He can be our token man.
We would definitely have. Oh no, we do have men from time to time.
We try very hard to make sure we have
more men. Yes, that sounds wrong, doesn't it? We need more men. No, moving swiftly on. Yes, and there was Stephanie Sowden as well, who's a debut novelist, and I'll be talking about her a little bit later. So yeah, that was good fun. And yeah. What about you, Lauren? What have you been doing?
I had just been finishing off the second draft of my psychological suspense, which is now starting to come together. I'm just reading it through and I think it's going to be okay. I've been very worried about this book and I've talked a lot about how hard it's been. So I'm hoping it's all coming together. But I stayed in a hotel on Sunday night, actually. I threw my toys out of the pram on Friday, had a glass of wine, and had been out like at an event all day for my son's sports day thing. And then I got back and had to sort the washing out, to sort the dinner out, and I hadn't done any work, and I just thought I just need a break. And so I just booked myself a hotel room for Sunday and said to my family I'm off, and it was so nice, so relaxing, even though I was working. And then it sort of gave my family a bit of a wake-up call as well, because they've sort of looked at how they can all do a bit more for themselves. So it's been a better week for me this week. So
that's a really good idea. And I saw that lovely photo of you lounging by a pool, and I thought, yes, that's exactly what you need to do.
So I'd like to do it every week really, but unfortunately a bit of a financial cost to that one.
Yes, indeed. But so I think we really need to, gosh, I can't get my word. I'm too excited. So we really need to get our fantastic guest on, don't we, straight away. And we would like to extend a huge In Suspense welcome to Lisa Jewell.
Welcome, Lisa Jewell, to In Suspense. We are so excited to have you on the show. I'm a huge fan, and obviously so is Leslie. Before we start, I'm going to read your bio. So Lisa Jewell's first novel, Ralph's Party, was the best-selling debut novel of 1999. Since then, she has written another 18 novels, most recently a number of dark psychological thrillers, including The Girls, Then She Was Gone, and The Family Upstairs, all of which were Sunday Times bestsellers and Richard and Judy Book Club picks. Lisa is a New York Times and Sunday Times #1 best-selling author who has been published worldwide in over 25 languages. She was the 5th best-selling UK author in 2021 and has sold 10 million copies of her books worldwide. She lives in North London with her husband, her 2 teenage daughters, and the best dog in the world, which I won't tell my dog Rodney that you said. You may have something to say about that. So now The Family Remains is out on the 21st of July. It is a sequel to the sensational best-selling novel, The Family Upstairs. I'm a huge fan of all your books, Lisa, but The Family Upstairs really got under my skin, especially one of the characters, Henry Lamb, which I'm going to talk to you about later. And I was so excited to hear there was a sequel. I took it on holiday with me and it just blew me away. It was everything I wanted and then loads more as well. It was sensational. So thank you for a wonderful read. And I wondered if you could start by telling us what The Family Remains is about, please.
Okay, so there are 2 ways of explaining The Family Remains, because obviously it's a sequel, but it's also a standalone book. So my elevator pitch to someone who hasn't read The Family Upstairs would be that The Family Remains starts with the discovery of a bag of human bones on the shores of the River Thames. And the investigation into the identity of those bones takes Detective Samuel Owusu into the story of a mansion on the banks of the Thames in Chelsea, where a few years, 10 years, 20 years earlier, 3 dead bodies had been found on the floor in the kitchen, wearing black robes with a hastily scrawled suicide note, while upstairs a healthy, well-cared-for baby is gurgling in her cot. So that is the elevator pitch for The Family Remains, if you haven't read The Family Upstairs. I could go on in much greater detail about what it consists of for somebody who has read The Family Upstairs, if you'd like me to do that. Or is that probably enough to be going on with?
Oh, I think that's probably enough to go with.
Yes, exactly.
A tantalising snippet. Yes, indeed. Now, Lisa, while The Family Remains is a brilliant psychological thriller, it really, really is a fascinating read. It's much, much more than that, I think. It's very complex. It's got lots of layers, complex characters. And I think because the shift in The Family Remains moves away from Libby in The Family Upstairs, it allows other characters and backstories from that first book to sort of come centre stage. And, for example, Rachel, one of the characters, and Lucy. And I was wondering how important it was for you to explore those aspects of the novel, and whether you discovered more about those characters as you were writing this sequel, or whether you always had those stories burning away.
That's a great question. Yeah, I don't think I could have come to this sequel if it had been merely going back to the same characters from the same book and following them from the same point. I love writing new books. I love a clean canvas. I love meeting a whole new cast of characters. So in fact, I cast my mind back to the family upstairs and thought, apart from the obvious sort of loose thread, which I left deliberately in the last chapter, there were still a number of other unresolved stories in the book. And so Rachel, for example, she gets mentioned so fleetingly in the first book. Lucy goes to see her ex-husband in Antibes to beg him for money. And during that meeting, he mentions the fact that his wife, Rachel, has not come to Antibes with him, that she's in London working. And that's it. We don't hear anything else about Rachel. We don't care about Rachel. But I thought, who is Rachel? Her husband has been found brutally murdered in his house in Antibes while she was in London. How is she going to react to that? What's her story with Michael? Did she have a similar experience to Lucy? So the minute I thought of her story, which I hadn't given a second thought to before, to answer your question, no, I hadn't had her story rattling around my head for months. The minute I had that question in my head of who is Rachel, I knew I was off. I knew I was like, okay, I think I can do a sequel now, because there's something new here for me to explore, which is absolutely vital for me when I come to a book that I've got new things to write about. The other loose threads, but yes, so you're right. I left Libby behind because I thought Libby's role was pretty much done, really. I'd brought her into the family upstairs to be my little detective, and she'd done her detective work, and there wasn't really much else to tell about Libby, so she goes into the background. What were the other loose ends that I tied up? I guess there's, yes, the fact that Lucy, who in the first book is seen killing her ex-husband, at the end of the family upstairs, she still feels this shadow over her. They haven't quite resolved this crime yet in France, and they're still looking for possible, other possible culprits. So yeah, there were all these little things. And of course, the most obvious one being Henry really wants to find Finn. And what does Henry want to do to Finn when Henry finds Finn? So there was an awful lot of stuff there that I could come to almost with that energy of a brand new novel, rather than just visiting the last one.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you say about, it can be a standalone as well. But I think, and obviously many people will maybe read that first and then go back. But, to have read the first with the family upstairs first, it really enhances the reading of it, I think. So it's great.
Yes, which is a shame. I really would have loved it to have been equally as pleasurable to read it without having read the first one. But I actually see that was impossible. Without constantly back referencing the first one, and that would have been clunky and awkward to keep going back to what happened in the first book. So I actually think that was sort of inevitable, that the second book would be always enhanced by having read the first one. But I would say to anyone who's read the first one and wants to read The Family Remains and is thinking, should I reread it? I actually think you could get just as much out of it by flicking through The Family Upstairs. If you haven't got time for a full reread, I think just flicking through it and just reading a few, every few pages, read a paragraph. And I think even in the space of half an hour, you probably have enough in the bank to come to the family room slightly refreshed.
Yeah, in fact, when I read, my friend said to me, oh, I have read The Family Upstairs, but it was a while ago. Do I need to reread it? And I said, actually, I don't think you do. I think you will be surprised how much you remember from The Family Upstairs when you meet the characters again. And I certainly, I hadn't refreshed, but I remembered everything. It all just came back. So
good.
It was brilliant.
That's reassuring.
I would dive a little deeper now and talk about Henry Lamb. So in The Family Upstairs, we meet a whole host of characters, and some of them are not very nice. And one of them is Henry Lamb, who is an awkward teenager at the time. And he is very much a victim, but he also makes some very questionable decisions and his whole character is then explored in so much more depth. And I wondered, when you thought about Henry as a character, did you think in advance of writing the book, oh, I want to create this really interesting character who's both unlikable and untrustworthy, but people can't get enough of? Or is it that he just evolved organically into who he was?
Well, yes, it's absolutely the latter. I knew that I needed at some point in the writing of the book, because I write forwards and I write without a plan. And I knew that at some point in the book, because I'd established that something had happened in this house in Chelsea, that one of my characters, I was going to have to bring a character in who could tell me and the reader what had happened in this house in Chelsea. I mean, it could have been anyone. But when I got closer and closer to needing to write that first chapter, I just thought, I've got these two strong female characters. Let's mix it up a bit and bring in a young boy. And actually, at the beginning of his first chapter, he's 10 years old. So he's not even an awkward teenager yet. He's not entirely sure. I'm really sorry about my dog barking in the background. He's not entirely sure who he is yet. He's about to start secondary school, and he's convinced that when he starts secondary school, he's going to find out who he is, because he's terribly confused. And then, of course, if you've read The Family Upstairs, you know poor Henry never gets to go to secondary school. So I introduced him on the page as this gauche, awkward 10-year-old boy. And it wasn't really until Finn arrived, however many chapters later on in the book, that I saw Henry really taking shape. And I saw his first obsession take place on the page while I was writing it. And then, so when all the bad things started happening in the house, he'd already established via me as his writer, which is kind of what I felt like, that he had, he was a very ambiguous character. He had a lot of dark and a lot of shade. And so, he evolved so organically on the page. I would never have imagined the sort of man he would end up to be. So he was kind of unusual even before all the terrible, traumatic stuff happened to him. He was already unusual, but he was. I didn't realise, or it hadn't occurred to me until probably a year after I finished writing it, that the summer before I started writing The Family Upstairs, I'd read the Tom Ripley novel.
Yes. God.
Yeah. So
yeah.
And I think without even consciously knowing I was doing it, I was channeling a little bit of Tom Ripley in him as I grew him on the page. So he was one of my favourite characters ever to grow with on the page, without a doubt.
Amazing. And I've just got another follow-up question here, because one of someone I know who knew I was talking to you today is a big fan as well. Her name's Laura Pearson, and she's a listener. And she asked, she's just read The Family Remains and she loved it. And she wanted to know, because I think she knows you're not a planner, whether you wrote the strands separately and all in one go and then weave them all in, or did you write it as it reads?
Yeah, no, I wrote it exactly as it reads.
Oh, wow.
Because one of the things that people find sort of irresistible about my books is that I do short chapters, and that they get to the end of one chapter and then they really, really want to go straight to the next chapter. People read my books very quickly because of that. And there's a lot of energy involved in those little twists from the end of one chapter to the beginning of the next. They have to bounce off each other.
Yeah.
So if I'd written all their storylines and then sliced them up like a Swiss roll and then sort of, spliced them back together, you would lose all that energy, the little bounce that goes from the end to the beginning. So it's really important for me when I'm doing multiple perspectives and multiple timelines that I write them in the order in which the reader is going to read them, so that I can cast my black magic over.
It certainly does seem like magic to me.
So that's absolutely part of how I create the pace and the energy of my books, is by doing that.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Really, really interesting. Now, you've said in this book, which we're going to come on and talk about, The Truth About Lisa Jewell, which is by Will Brooker. Yes, we're going to come and talk about that in a little while. But you've said in there that you never intended to write a sequel to The Family Upstairs, and I just wondered what actually made you change your mind.
Yes, that's very good question. Very good question indeed. It was sort of it was an awful lot of reader pressure involved, I would say. I think it was something that had occurred to me, particularly because the epilogue of The Family Upstairs, I always like to throw something into my epilogues that throws a reader off their balance a bit and makes them go, ooh. And usually it's something that sends the reader back inside the book to think about something that happened earlier in a whole new way. Whereas the epilogue at the end of The Family Upstairs, I think, threw the reader into a potential second book. Actually, it was almost like it opened a door into a sequel. So I was kind of aware of the fact that I'd done that. And I was kind of curious. I was very curious, in fact, about what Henry was going to do when he found Finn. I sort of wanted to know. But then I'm often curious about what my characters are going to do at the end of the book. So there was a seed of it already there. But yes, it was the sheer volume of requests I had from readers via social media. And not just that, not just readers going, oh, please, could you write a sequel, but readers who assumed that there would be one. So I just thought, actually, and as I said, it was that Rachel moment, that moment of thinking there's a whole new story I can bring into this. And I thought, okay, let's go for it. Let's give the readers what they want, and make it fun for me. So yeah, it was that sort of tipping point, really.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's as if your subconscious kind of always knew that you were going to write a sequel because you'd left it open.
Yeah. Yes, I did that. Yes, I did that to myself.
Nobody to blame but yourself. No,
Yeah,
I'm very glad you did. I'm very glad you did, because it's a fantastic read. What advice would you give anyone who might be considering writing a sequel to something that, you know, was initially a standalone? Have you got any sort of tips or advice?
Well, I would absolutely say there are two questions you need to ask yourself. Do you have a drive to revisit those characters and revisit unresolved storylines? Is it inside your gut, this feeling like you're going to feel frustrated if you can't revisit the original book? And number two, do you think there's a market for it? Do you think your readers are in the game for it? Would they be delighted and ecstatic to hear that you were doing it? And I think if the answer to both of those is yes, then go for it. If the answer to either of those is no, then you should probably stop and think about it, because this is a thing you see in a career that spans many novels. Is you're only ever one book away from the book that could, you know, be your breakout book, the one that could change everything for you. So unless you're going to sit down and write a series deliberately, I think there's a lot to be said for always writing something new and pulling something completely fresh and different out of yourself every single time to build your readership and build your sales and build your career and learn new skills and what have you. So you'd have to have very, very good reasons, I think, to revisit a book that you've already written. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's really fascinating.
Really good advice.
It really is. So Leslie just mentioned The Truth About Lisa Jewell, which is written by Will Brooker and subtitled A Year in the Life of a Best-Selling Novelist. And it's a book that's written about the process of writing a book while you wrote The Family Remains. Will Brooker is a professor of film and cultural studies at Kingston University, who in 2019 wrote a book based on his research called Why Bowie Matters. And then at the end of that year, I believe that your paths crossed at an event. And I think it's fair to say that Will became very interested in you, Lisa, as an author. And I wondered if you could talk about what it was like to agree to having that book written about you and the formation of your relationship with Will, please.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, extraordinary. Yes, so we did this event together. We were both on the same panel separately in December 2019. It was an LGBTQ event. I was there to talk about my career as a writer, and Will was there to talk about Why Bowie Matters. And after that event, we went very quickly into lockdown, and Will did what a lot of people did at the beginning of lockdown. He bought The Family Upstairs. I mean, it was one of the best, I think the top 3 best-selling novels of the first lockdown in 2020. And then he thought, whoa, that's not what I was expecting. What's going on here? Bought another one, thought, wow, this is, not not what he was expecting from commercial women's thrillers. And then just proceeded to kind of go through my backlist. And then he was reminded of a book that came out a few years previously to that, which was called Reacher Said Nothing, which is a study of Lee Child writing his 20th novel by an academic called Andy Martin, who shadowed him for a year and actually sat in his room and watched him type, which I found quite strange. And Will thought, wouldn't it be interesting to do a similar book about Lisa Jewell? And he approached Andy Martin, and the two of them then approached me. And to say I was shocked and surprised to find that email in my inbox is putting it mildly. You have to remember that I come from this background of chick lit, and of having to prove myself constantly. And so to suddenly have two academics in my inbox saying, we'd like to write a book about you, was very, very unexpected. And I was quite thrown. But then my friend is friends with Lee Child, so I asked her if she would write to him on my behalf and say, what do you think about this? How was it for you? And Lee Child wrote back and said it had its pros, it had its cons, but on the whole, I think it was well worth doing from my perspective. And if Lisa feels confident about doing it, and you do have to have a certain amount of confidence, then she should absolutely go for it. I thought, fine, okay, I'm in, I'm going to do it. We lost Andy Martin because I could tell that he actually wasn't a Lisa Jewell fan. And I think this is the sort of book that could only have been written by someone who had a genuine love and enthusiasm for my books, rather than a cool sort of, detached narrator. It needed to be someone who was there in the books completely, wholeheartedly. So I said yes. And we kicked off in January 2021 with a Zoom. And I was in a room very like yours, Leslie, in fact, like this sort of hotel studio room I'd been renting to write in during the third lockdown or whatever it was. And that's when the project kicked off. And a year later, it wrapped up at the same time as The Family Remains wrapped up. So yeah, it was neat and it was fun and I enjoyed it.
Lisa, I love the fact that this is an in-depth analysis of a commercial fiction writer, a genre writer, because often that level of sort of academic scrutiny that Will Brooker brings to the table is reserved for, writers of literary fiction, with the exception, obviously, as you've just said, of Reacher Said Nothing. And I wondered whether that was one of the reasons you agreed to let Will Brooker into your creative process, to kind of help to dispel some of this, the snobbery really that surrounds genre fiction. Was that one of the reasons? Yes,
absolutely. It was very much a sense of that, I feel I owe it to every other single successful female writer of commercial fiction who finds it so hard to be taken seriously to allow this process to happen to me in my work. That was absolutely a part of it. But there was also another part of it, which was, if he hadn't asked me and he'd asked one of my contemporaries, I would be so on board for reading that book. I would be so ready to have that book in my life. I would want that book. So I just thought, a combination of those two factors, I felt like I really couldn't say no.
Yeah. And the fact that he's a man, yes, writing about a woman, because, you hear so many stories, don't you, about men not reading books by women and all that sort of thing. So that again is another sort of good thing about it,
Yes, it's really refreshing. It's really, really refreshing. And the Reacher Said Nothing book is so male. It's so male. Andy Martin is such a bloke, and Lee Child is such a bloke. And there's so much male energy in that book, and it's awesome. But I think this was just really refreshing and uplifting to have that contrast, that male female thing, and the female to be the subject of a male's academic interest is just. And I didn't even have to be dead. I'm sure there are lots of men who write books about dead female writers, but yeah, there was something very special about that.
As you just said about, you knew that if someone had written it about somebody else, you'd be desperate to read it, as indeed was I, and as indeed I'm sure everyone will be.
I was, yeah.
The minute I saw it, I thought, I had dropped everything and just turned the pages.
And it is, even though there's a lot of kind of, what you could call dry academic stuff in there, particularly in the early chapters, I still think it's weirdly page turning. It's got a weird sort of narrative tug through the whole thing of just sort of, and it's not even like, oh, is she going to get the book written? Because we know I've written the book because it's out there.
Yeah.
But there's still something that's sort of, really propulsive about it, which I can't quite put my finger on what it is.
I really liked how he taught each chapter sort of was divided. You had sort of his analysis, and then the next one he was talking about you much more in your characters, and sort of there was quite a lot of interest in that for me. It just kept pulling me all the way through. So yeah, it was a really fascinating book.
And interestingly, Will is a massive planner. He had that whole book planned out at the beginning of the year, chapter by chapter. So even like our face-to-face meetings, he'd already planned that we would go to the Polari in December of that year, but in the January of that year. So it was interesting contrast between his massively micromanaged plan for his book and my sort of throwing caution to the wind and just sort of letting myself be taken where the wind took me every single day when I came to so it was a lovely contrast, I think.
And I was struck by the depth of analysis that Will went into about your novels, and the comparisons he drew with literary greats such as James Joyce and Virginia Woolf, Albert Camus and Henry James as well, to name but a few. How did it feel to have your work analysed to that extent? Was it quite daunting? And do you think you can really analyse the creativity process, especially for someone? I felt a little bit at times to me like he was trying to find connections that you were a bit like, oh no, that's not a connection. And I think it was quite an interesting way to do it, and I just wondered how that must have felt.
It wasn't, I hadn't expected it before the project was undertaken. I hadn't expected that aspect. So because he sent me his chapters as he wrote them for my approval. So when I started seeing this aspect of his book come through, I was slightly thrown. And bearing in mind as well that I'm not au fait with the classics. I didn't go to university. I didn't study English literature. I didn't, I haven't read most of the books that he's referring to. I've always been a reader of massively contemporary and commercial fiction. And literary fiction. I haven't studied the classics, and I have no interest in doing so. And I didn't even enjoy it at school. So it was kind of totally out of my zone. And I felt very much like, I'm just going to let him do him over there with the stuff, with the, I think I was slightly more kind of engaged with comparisons with Martin Amis, for example, whose books I read voraciously back in the 90s. But yes, I just think that was him sort of showing his academic honnêtes in a way, on giving it that sort of backdrop. And I think you're right. I've always had issues with the studying of literary text, that analysis of literary text. And I find it challenging to see the way that my children are taught English literature at school now, coming from the perspective of someone who's spent 25 years writing fiction. And knowing how many of the things that are analysed in such painful depth in the study of English literature are literally just things that drop onto the page from out of your head without you giving it a second's thought, and there's no symbolism, and you're not referring back to anything, and you're not deliberately using a sort of poetic rhythm or alliteration deliberately. These things just happen by accident. So I've always kind of had issues with that anyway. But that said, it's only a small part of his book, and I think there's something strangely fascinating about it. And I like the way he just takes little chunks of text from some of the classics and lines them up against little chunks of text from mine. I think what he's ultimately saying is, just because it's packaged as commercial fiction, it doesn't mean there isn't stuff of real value and quality, timeless quality in the books that are sold so cheaply as commercial. So yeah, I was kind of on both sides of it, really.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, that sort of academic look at what is, for many of us, as you just said, an instinctive process, and we're not analysing it as we go. So that
no, we don't ever go back to a sentence and think, shall I alliterate that sentence? Don't. It's either alliterated or it's not. It's just
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that you sent the very first chapter of the family upstairs to the family remains, claiming it was rubbish, and Will gave you some feedback on it, and you eventually scrapped that first chapter. Is that
that's
correct?
Not quite right. No,
not right.
I was sending him my chapters as I wrote them, and I had thought that I might like to go straight to Finn.
Right.
So I wrote a chapter about Finn and realised that I didn't have a clue who Finn was, because I'd only ever seen him through Henry's very warped perspective. I'd never actually spent any time wondering who Finn really was. And I realised that because he was gay, I was writing him as a stereotype. I wasn't giving him any nuance or any depth. And I just thought, no, back off. Do not go to Finn yet. You're not ready to go to Finn. So I scrapped it, but that was nothing to do with Will. That was all.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I could tell.
Yeah, we were wondering how far, if you were sort of sharing bits of the book with him. I know, and he, whether you took his feedback on board or not, but do you think that might have had any impact on the creation of the book itself? For example, would it have been a different book if you hadn't have been doing that process with Will at the same time?
I think without a doubt it would have been a different book.
Oh.
I very much think it would have been a different book. I have no idea by how many degrees. It might have been 1 degree different. It might have been 180 degrees different. I don't know, but he definitely had an influence on the way the book evolved. And this is the thing, you girls know this, when you are given feedback on a work in progress, if it's the right feedback, there's nothing better, there's nothing more helpful or encouraging or motivating than someone saying, well, what about this? If someone says the wrong thing, it just makes you want to jump up and down and scream and slap people. And so it's very, very important when you're taking feedback from people while you're writing a book that they're the right people, because if it's the wrong person, they can absolutely just get in the way and actually halt your creativity. And Will was just the right guy. There's nothing he ever said that I just thought, what are you talking about? Why would I do that? Or why would that character think that? Every single time he made a suggestion, which wasn't that often, I just, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right, which is exactly the same relationship I have with my editor.
Yeah.
Every suggestion she ever makes is constructive, positive, and motivating.
Yeah.
So yes, it would have been very, very different if somebody else had been shadowing me, who did annoy me. But yes, and having that kind of constant two-way thing as the book was evolving absolutely must have had an effect on both the storyline and, I would say, more saliently, the quality of my writing, because this is the thing. He kept sending me his chapters going on about what an amazing writer I was. And so then I kept thinking, well, I'm going to have to be this amazing writer. I can't be writing a book about what an amazing writer I am, and then I just send him duff writing.
Well, the first draft, though, that must have been really hard, because the first draft isn't the polished end thing that's in the book, is it?
Well, it sort of was. I mean, this sort of the book, this book is pretty much, as obviously apart from structural edits and what have you, was the book as I wrote it. And so I did sort of write up to his expectations of my writing, which it's a good thing. Maybe I should always have that.
Yes, we should always have an academic perched on our shoulder.
Yes, exactly.
To spur us on to literary greatness.
Yeah, I think I'd cry if I had a.
Will you and Will Brooker be doing any events together in the coming months?
Yes, we are doing. Well, we're doing an online Guardian masterclass on the 28th of July. Which is an evening event which can be subscribed to. And then we're doing an in-person event at Cuckfest in Cuckfield, which I think is in West Sussex, I think, which is in October, somewhere in the middle of October. Forgive me for not knowing precisely when. So we've got those 2 in the diary.
Oh, well, presumably it'll be on your events page on your website.
Yes, or my newsletter, which carries lots and lots of useful information like that.
And we always like to ask our guests what they're reading at the moment, or what they've just finished reading, as sort of any recommendations they can offer.
All right, so I'm currently reading this Penny Hancock.
Oh, the choice.
Yes. Have you read any Penny Hancock?
I have. Now she won an award.
Rich and Judy.
Yeah, she's really brilliant writer. Did
she wrote
called Tide?
Yes,
Tidelines. That's it.
She wrote these 3 amazing novels set in the sort of bowels of the Thames estuary with all the flat lands, and then there was one that was set in not Greenwich, Woolwich, I think, in those ancient old merchants' houses that overlook the banks of the River Thames, and so atmospheric and so twisted. And yeah, she's been quiet for a while, so I'm very, very excited to find this on my doormat from the postman. And I'm halfway through that, and it's about the repercussions of a grandmother forgetting to collect her small grandson from school one afternoon, and he goes missing. So very, very good. I love Penny Hancock. More power to Penny Hancock, I say. And then what the good books that I've read lately. Why has my mind gone a blank? Hold on, what good books have I read lately? Why can I not think of good books I've read lately?
It happens to all of us, doesn't it?
That's my to be read pile. That behind me. This.
Oh yeah.
Shocking. It goes all the way down to the floor, by the way. Wrong Time, Wrong Place.
Oh yes.
Alistair.
What a sensational book.
Yeah, that is absolutely extraordinary. One of those books where, as a seasoned writer, where you kind of think you've got it all wrapped up, you know exactly what you're doing, and then you read a book like that by one of your contemporaries, and you're like, whoa, I've still got so much to learn. Really clever book. But
I'm really excited to see what she does next.
Gillian's name also crops up in the Truth About Lisa Jewell, doesn't it?
Because Will's a Gillian McAllister fan as well. Yes, there you go. But most of the books I'm most excited about, I've been saving like treats for my summer holiday. Got a little pile of books that I cannot wait to get stuck into in August. So yes, saving the.
What about you, Lauren? Are you reading anything?
Yes, I have almost finished Philip East's new book, I'll Never Tell, which I haven't got told up because it's a very early proof. So I'm really lucky to have got my hands on that. And it is absolutely brilliant, her best one yet. And I'm really enjoying it. And then I've got to read next The Blame Game by Sandy Jones, who I'm a big fan of. She's a great psychological suspense author. So I'm really looking forward to reading that one. What about you, Leslie?
Oh, well, because I went to an event yesterday with Stephanie Sowden, who is a debut author. And
what great cover that is.
That is amazing,
cover, isn't it? After Everything You Did. And it's about a woman who is set in America, wakes in a hospital with no memory of who she is, but she's told 3 things: that her name is Rita Doe, she's been in a car accident, and she is one of the FBI's most wanted killers, but she cannot remember anything. So I can't wait to get into that. So that's by Stephanie Sowden, After Everything You Did. And I also picked up Fire Watching by Russ Thomas. When I went to go and buy, they'd packed all the books away, and I said I wanted the latest one, Cold Reckoning, so I'm going to buy that as well. But I picked up that and got them signed, obviously.
Lovely.
So looking forward to those.
Well, sadly, that is all we've got time for. And thank you so much, Lisa, for coming on the show. I could have spoken to you all day about your process and your magic and your book. So thank you very much for your time. I am a huge fan, and this has been an absolute dream. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. Thank you both very much.
It has been fantastic having you on. I'm a huge fan as well. And we're honoured to have chatted with you. But while just for our listeners' benefit, while our minisodes, I think they've finished now, haven't they, Laurie?
Yes.
We do have one more episode, a full-length episode with, I think we've got Victoria Selman coming on, and the topic will be part 2 of Keeping It Real, and we're going to be looking at the topic of storyline. So that's our last show, and then we're going to have a bit of a break, aren't we, after that?
Yes, for the summer. Hooray! But that just leaves me with the final task of saying goodbye from Lisa.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye from Leslie.
Bye.
And goodbye from me.